I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. I've been washed in the fountain, cleansed by His blood, joint heirs with Jesus as we travel this side. For I'm part of the family of God.
When I planned out this series on the first kings of Israel and this theme, this motif of kingship in the Bible that we ultimately see culminating in Jesus Christ, I discovered there was a little bit of a challenge in trying to be both thorough but also not belaboring topics, I guess. And so there's a large stretch of David's life and Saul's life, because they're linked, where Saul is pursuing David. David is running away from Saul. And there are a lot of the same themes that emerge in these chapters. And it basically extends from essentially chapter 18 of 1 Samuel all the way through the very end of 1 Samuel, which is when Saul dies in battle. And so this is the attempt in trying to cover most of the big topics, if you will, as it relates to this era of David and Saul's life, but at the same time, not belaboring it. To date, we haven't really talked a lot about one of the things that David is most famous for, and that is that he was a prolific writer of songs. And so we're going to encounter some of those today. We'll get into that in a little bit. But if you brought a Bible with you, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 26. 1 Samuel chapter 26. And we have an interesting encounter between David and Saul, and David's people and Saul's people. It's not new. We've already broached this subject earlier in chapter 24, but from the perspective of Saul. So today, more focused on David than on Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 26, let's start at the first verse. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon?" So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 chosen men of Israel to search there for David. Saul made his camp beside the road on the hill of Hachilah, facing Jeshimon. But David stayed in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. Then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the commander of the army, had lain down. Saul was lying inside the camp with the army encamped around him. David then asked Ahimelech, the Hittite, and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, "Who will go down into the camp with me to Saul?" "I'll go with you," said Abishai. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him. Either his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go." So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill, some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army and to Abner, son of Ner, "Aren't you going to answer me, Abner?" Abner replied, "Who are you who calls to the king?" David said, "You are a man, aren't you? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. What you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men deserve to die because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head?" Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" David replied, "Yes, it is, my lord the king." And he added, "Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has incited you against me, then may he accept an offering. If, however, men have done it, may they be cursed before the Lord. They have now driven me from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, 'Go serve other gods.' Now do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. The king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains." Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you considered my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again. Surely I have acted like a fool and have erred greatly." "Here is the king's spear," David answered. "Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble." Then Saul said to David, "May you be blessed, my son David. You will do great things and surely triumph." So David went on his way, and Saul returned home. This is the word of the Lord for us this morning. Let us bow our heads and pray to our Heavenly Father. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the truth that you give to us. Thank you that you are near, that you want to be known by us, that you care deeply about all the details of our lives, that you desire to help us be a part of what you're doing. Thank you for the eternal marching orders that you give to us to affect eternity by sharing the gospel. Lord, as we turn to this passage, we humbly ask that you would speak to us this morning, that we would recognize your voice, that we would conform to the way in which you desire for us to live. So oftentimes we see ourselves on the pages of Scripture in these people because they're so much like us. And so we humbly ask that you would speak to us this morning, that we might be changed from the inside out. And to your glory, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So as I mentioned, this is the second time, not the first, but the second time that David has spared Saul in a very clear instance where he could have taken his life without any trouble whatsoever. This time, it doesn't happen in a cave. It happens out in the open area, if you will. And you have a young man, Abishai, who comes with him. And we see that history is kind of repeated here. like it was in the cave incident. Verse 8, Abishai says to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice." Just like the men before encouraged him to take Saul's life while he's relieving himself in the cave, now Abishai tells David, "Kill him. You have the opportunity. Even God has delivered him into your hands." And I love his moxie, right? "It won't take me 2 throws of my spear, just one." Apparently he does well with his instruments of war, if you will. And David shows restraint. He says, "No." He says, "It's not my duty. I don't have permission to take the Lord's anointed. I can't take his life. Let that happen either naturally or in battle, but it's not something that I want to partake of." But I think it's important to notice here what is taken of Saul's. Verse 16. David calls out across the valley, "Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head?" Those are 2 very specific things. And when Abner, who's the head of Saul's army, when Abner looks around and the rest of his assistants and Saul himself, and they notice that they're gone, they realize that they were, David and Abishai were right there. They could have taken his life. And while these things actually take place, they're also symbols of something much deeper than that. They are symbols of Saul's valor. He runs one of the most powerful armies of the world at that time. He is king over Israel, a nation that's emerging and being a very critical keystone piece in the ancient Near East, in that area, in the land of Canaan. And yet he's been outwitted. He's not perhaps the army commander that he walks around, a head taller than everybody else, but maybe he's not as skilled as thought. Because David snuck into camp and just took his spear. On top of that, taking the jug of water is a reminder that life itself is in the balance. We all need to eat, we all need to drink, we need air to breathe. We need shelter so that we don't die from the elements. At least around here we do. And we see that those are taken. And we'll go backward in time to chapter 24 in just a little bit. But do you remember what was taken from Saul before when David encountered him in the cave? What was it that he actually took?
Piece of his cloak.
Yeah, the corner of his robe, which is a symbol of him being cut off from the kingdom that God is trying to establish. But it's deeper than that. As we explored that one week, those tassels on the corners of the garments are a symbol of following God's commands. And in a very deep way, this was an image of Saul being separated from God himself. And so you look at all the categories now. Starts with the kingdom that Saul wanted to hold on to so desperately, his relationship with God, which is now irrevocably in jeopardy, and now the very few things that Saul can still hold on to, that he's this mighty warrior, that he can at least still sustain life, they are now put in the balance because David has shown that Saul is incredibly vulnerable. Ultimately, we see in these events that Saul becomes separated from God in a very profound and deep way. And these are the words that are being fulfilled from what Samuel, the man of God, told Saul that God will not establish his forever kingdom through his line. It will not come through Saul himself. This whole section, chapter 18 all the way through the end of 1 Samuel, shows David on the run. David on the run, Saul chasing after him. There's so many different encounters. And I noticed something when I was preparing for this section. Notice 1 Samuel chapter 26, verse 20. David says, "Now do not let my blood fall to the ground, far from the presence of the Lord. The king of Israel," that is Saul, "has come out to look for a," what? A flea. It's interesting, this little word flea, because it's only used a couple of times. It's not a real common word in the Bible, but it's used also in chapter 24. David says, "Who are you chasing after? A flea?" What's a flea? Yeah, it's something that's incredibly insignificant. And David says, "Saul, you've got this whole army with you. Sometimes thousands of men pursuing David. You're the king of Israel. And yet you're pursuing me with all of your resources. What is wrong with you?" And he calls him out in both of these encounters and persuades Saul in both situations to back down, to realize, wow, I just had a brush with death. David could have taken my life, and yet this little flea of a man has outshone the king of Israel. And so one of the interesting aspects of what we see from David is that if you turn to the book of Psalms, which is the hymn book, if you will, the song book of the Bible, that there, at least on some of the Psalms, there are some titles that give us a little bit of a description of what actually took place. And so I've entitled this message, "The Songs of the Flea," because some of these songs, in fact, the majority of the Psalms were written by David. Many of them, it says so right in the title of the Psalm. Others still may have been written by David, though we don't know for sure. And then we see that Solomon wrote one or two, and Asaph, and a couple of other people, but David is largely responsible for the book of Psalms. And what we notice is that this time period in his life, the time period where he's on the run from Saul, has probably the highest density of incidences that are reported at the head of the psalm. The actual encounter in which he wrote that tune, if you will, is during this period of time in his life. And I want to look at a couple of them. And there's lots and lots of things that we could do, but what I've chosen to do is to look at this. One, do we see the duress, the stress that David is under? And then, how does David see God in these situations according to these Psalms? So the very first one is Psalm 59 that I want to look at. We've had to make some choices here because we don't have time to go through all of them. Notice Psalm 59. The title just below Psalm 59 says, "For the director of music," it tells us the tune that it's sung to, "Do Not Destroy." That's interesting. It's of David. It's a miktam. We don't have time to go into those details, but if you want to explore that, you can certainly do that in your quiet time. And then it says, "When Saul had sent men to watch David's house in order to kill him. This is the event that takes place in 1 Samuel chapter 19. Do you remember last week you saw, well, some of you realized for the first time that I'm a romantic, that I fall for a good love story, right? And that involved Michal, who was one of Saul's daughters, and she's madly in love with him, and they end up getting married, and they go off to their house, and Saul is now very, very upset with David, angry to the point where he wants to kill him, and he actually sends his men to go take him out. And when they get to the door, Michal intervenes, and what does she say that is wrong with David? He's sick. He's ill. And that would not be a very nice way to go. At least let him start feeling better, right? I don't know about the logic of that, but whatever. And then she tells him, you need to run, David. And he slips out a window out the back side of the house and goes out into the wilderness. And what does Michal do?
Makes it look like he's still in his bed.
Yeah, she takes an idol, she puts goat's hair on the top to make it look like hair. Apparently David had, pretty good hair going. And, put a cloak or whatever over the top. And when the guys look in, they realize they've been duped. And so that's the situation in which David writes these words. Let's start at verse 1. Deliver me from my enemies, O God. Protect me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from evildoers and save me from bloodthirsty men. See how they lie in wait for me. Fierce men conspire against me. For no offense or sin of mine, O Lord, I have done no wrong, yet they are ready to attack me. Arise to help me. Look on my plight, O Lord God Almighty, the God of Israel. Rouse yourself to punish all the nations. Show no mercy to wicked traitors. Notice this language. They return at evening, snarling like dogs, and prowl about the city. See what they spew with their mouths. They spew out words from their lips, and they say, who can hear us? But you, O Lord, laugh at them. You scoff at all those nations. O my strength, I watch for you. You, O God, are my fortress, my loving God. God will go before me and will let me gloat over those who slander me. But do not kill them, O Lord, our shield, or my people will forget. In your might, make them wander about and bring them down. For the sins of their mouths, for the words of their lips, let them be caught in their pride. For the curses and lies they utter, consume them in wrath. Consume them till they are no more. Then it will be known to the ends of the earth that God rules over Jacob. We're going to stop there just for brevity's sake. What do we see here? We see that David very much feels pressure from all directions, it seems, at this time. He feels very isolated and alone. Everywhere that he goes, there are people lying in wait to try to take him out. But we also see that he has this connection with God. He specifically here, in this passage of Psalm 59, he specifically sees God as his strength. It's capitalized in most translations. And then it also mentions the fact that God is his fortress and his shield. I think it's important to understand what's going on here. David, who is running for his life, sees God as the place where he can find security, the place where he can have the strength to endure. Have you been through a difficult time, or maybe you are right now? Maybe you're going through the ringer even in real time right now. or there's stress from a relationship, or you just feel like there's people that have it out for you, or maybe you've been unjustly treated, and you don't know that it's going to work out. It might come unraveled completely. That's David. That's David's situation. And I think it's really a unique perspective to be able to have these notes of when David wrote these songs connected to real historical events, so that we don't look at this as, pretty literature, or as, theology by a poet, or like it's just divorced from reality. It's very much anchored in the realness of life. And in the midst of this, the strength that David has comes from God. Not from his army, not from his great skill set, not because he knows the terrain, not because he's smart and can outwit Saul and the rest, because he has strength from God. And it's not just physical strength, although that's an important component, right? We need physical strength. There's times where we're beaten down and worn out. I just came through a sickness. I know a bunch of you have too. And it's not like one day you just go, okay, I'm better. If you have something that, especially if it's a virus of some sort that is pretty severe, a cold, whatever it might be, you know that you don't gain your strength back right away. And when you're weak, man, you feel vulnerable because you can't do the things that you normally do. But it goes way beyond just the physical. There is a mental toll when you are under duress, is there not? And there is also a spiritual need for strength. To be reminded of who God is in the midst of these difficult times. So if you're facing something, we have all the tendencies and all the excuses and reasons why we should turn to all kinds of solutions. But David, his solution is to turn to God, to be reminded that God is his strength, that God is his fortress, that God is his shield. Now, I want you to hold two things together simultaneously as we look at these Psalms. On one hand, David never polishes things up and goes, it's not really a big deal. You notice in some of his language, and these Psalms are not over the top, but some of them, the language he uses, man, it's not polished at all. He is vulnerable and raw about what's going on inside of him. He wishes ill sometimes for his enemies, because he's under real duress. So we hold on one hand the reality of life, the stuff that we go through. It's real for all of us. It was real for David. But we also hold out this concept and idea that we as Christians find our strength in God. That we can still turn to God in the midst of things that are difficult. All right, let's turn the page to Psalm 52, back just a couple. Psalm 52, for the director of music, this is a psalm of David. When Doeg, the Edomite, had gone to Saul and told him, David has gone to the house of Ahimelech. All right, so that account is found in 1 Samuel chapter 21. I've entitled this, Doeg, the Rattlesnake Shepherd. You know what a rattlesnake is? I mean, more than the actual snake itself. Maybe this is an Eastern Pennsylvania thing. My dad used to use this term all the time. A rattlesnake is somebody who will rat anybody out. They'll give, information and gossip and talk behind people's backs, and it doesn't really matter. Do you remember this incident? in 1 Samuel 21? David is on the run, and he ends up going where?
Nob.
The temple.
What's that?
The temple.
Yeah, okay, Nob and the temple, and when he gets to the temple, what does he find? Or who does he find?
Goliath's sword.
Okay, that's one of the things he finds. Who does he find there?
The priest, I forget his name.
It's right there at the top of Psalm 52.
Ahimelech.
Ahimelech, right?
Oh, okay.
All right? And so he says to him, David is in a really desperate situation, right? He doesn't have food to eat. And he says, do you have anything to eat? And what does Ahimelech say?
Why are you here?
Oh, all we have is the bread of the presence.
Yeah, the holy bread, right? The bread that's not fit for somebody like you to eat. And David convinces him, these are dire circumstances. And they've just switched out the bread anyway, right? So David takes the bread and eats it and gives it to his men. And then we also see that, Marianne, what does he take with him?
Goliath's sword.
Yeah. And David makes this comment, there is none like it. It's a unique sword. And no doubt he's already seen that when he faced him in battle. But now he is taking it with him to help protect him while he is on the run. Who else is there?
Doeg.
Yeah, Doeg. And who is Doeg?
King's shepherd.
What is he?
The king's shepherd. Head
Yeah,
shepherd.
Saul, King Saul's shepherd. And he goes back to Saul after this incident and goes, hey, guess what? I'd like to move up my rank within your whole political system here, Saul. I have some information you'd probably like to know. I know where David is. Oh, doesn't that make you cringe and just grimace? How dare you do something like that? And that's the situation in which David finds himself and writes Psalm 52. Let's look at verse 1. This is a psalm that's written, at first at least, to Doeg. Why do you boast of evil, you mighty man? Why do you boast all day long, you who are a disgrace in the eyes of God? Your tongue plots destruction. It's like a sharpened razor, you who practice deceit. You love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking the truth. You love every harmful word, oh, you deceitful tongue. I want to stop there for a second. Do you know people? Do you ever see this quality in you? Where you just get this delight out of seeing bad things happen, like chaos ensuing. You know the kinds of people that are like these fight promoters, and they're just like, I just want to see chaos. Let's add some drama to the day. And so they stir the pot by maybe saying a half-truth and then adding a little bit to it, or just outright lying, or perhaps they use slander, or they just don't know when to keep their mouth shut. That's Doeg. And David calls him out for it. Let's jump to verse 8. David, in contrast to Doeg, is like an olive tree, flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. I will praise you forever for what you have done. In your name I will hope, for your name is good. I will praise you in the presence of your saints. Notice, what does it mean that you put hope in somebody's name? What is somebody's name? At least in Bible times, what's actually in a name? Yeah, their reputation, their character, the very core of who they are. And sometimes we actually see that there's a correlation where the meaning of their name, and this is like most profound probably in somebody like Jacob, depending on how you translate it, we see that his name actually has hidden meaning for what he's going to carry out in his life. And so sometimes it's quite literal, but other times it's just anchored in the fact that we know that our name means something. I'll never forget the day that I went with my grandpa out to the lumber yard, and this was in the twilight of his life, and I don't even remember what we were getting. I think it was some 2B stone or something, and we went in to pay for it, and I don't know why the man asked at the cash register something about, "This is a good check, isn't it?" And he looked at it and he said, "Meyer, that's a name you can trust." And he was a very reputable person, very honest. And I just think, but is there evidence of that? Can you actually say that's actually true? Can you look at Landis Meyer, my grandpa, and say, yeah, that's a name you can trust? There have been hundreds of people who would have vouched for it. That's something that you just don't gain overnight. It's something that you gain over a long period of time of doing the right thing, and especially in difficult circumstances. And here, God's name, what is anchored in God's name? Well, notice what is attached to this. For your name is good. And it's in your name, God, that I'm going to hope, David says. My situation feels hopeless. There's rattlesnakes out here who are trying to have me killed. And yet I trust in you, God, that you, at the core of who you are, your reputation, your character, that's what I hold on to in the midst of strife. One more. Turn to Psalm 57. Apparently the song "Do Not Destroy" was a hit at that time, because Psalm 57 is also sung to the tune "Do Not Destroy." And it says here specifically, when David had fled from Saul into the cave. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 24, and that whole incident where Saul goes to relieve himself. David cuts off the corner of his robe and then calls out to him after Saul leaves the area. We'll also see another song that is written at this same period of time in Psalm 142, but let's first look at Psalm 57. Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me, for in you my soul takes refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends his love and his faithfulness. I am in the midst of lions. I lie among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. This concept of God as a refuge comes up in a lot of David's songs. And one of the reasons this is mentioned in David's writing is because he was on the run for so much of his life. He needed safety. He needed refuge. And it's interesting that while he is in a cave, a place of refuge, that he finds that his true safety is not in that cave, but in God himself. For in you my soul takes refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings. If you know anything about chickens, and when they have young, the mothers, they're phenomenal mothers. And they spread their wings out, right? And they protect their young from the wind and from the rain and snow. From critters that would want to cause them harm. This is the image of God providing refuge for David, even though he is in despair. Flip over to Psalm 142. Again, same historical incident, the incident of the cave. Again, the title says, when he was in the cave, and this one is titled, A Prayer. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out my complaint before him. Before him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who know my way. In the path where I walk, men have hidden a snare for me. Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me. One of the things that examining some of these Psalms in light of their historical reality did for me as I first encountered these in a new light, I guess, preparing for this sermon series, is that you see some of the references that you're like, wow, I don't know, I don't think I could read that to somebody who's on their deathbed or going through a nasty divorce or enduring some kind of strife in life, because it's really specific. But it shows us that David is honest about his situations, and that these are anchored in reality. These aren't just like, let's just say some niceties and they don't have any meat on them. Rather, when David says the things that he does about God, or about himself, or about the world as he sees it around him, we know that he's doing it despite the fact that oftentimes like this, he is in an extreme situation. And so here we see the refuge reference again, but we also see that God is his portion. What did it mean to be the portion, or what was a portion in David's time?
3/4 of his life.
Okay, so you're saying a segment of his life,
Yeah.
but what specifically was the portion as he's referring to it here? You are my portion, God. What does that mean? Yeah, inheritance. That would be another word that could be used here. So how is God David's inheritance? Here is the thing that should make Christians the most hopeful people on the face of the earth. If God protects me from whatever calamity I'm facing, then I get to go on living. I get to experience another sunrise. I continue to breathe in fresh air. I can do meaningful things with my life. I can make an eternal difference in people's lives if I choose to listen to God and be obedient to Him. But if I die, I have just as much an inheritance, right? Because I have salvation that comes to me from God by the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. And now He intercedes on behalf of all of us. What an assurance. This week, I don't know if any of you caught any of the footage, but I lived in Southern California for 3 years when I went to seminary. I lived in Pasadena. Pasadena is here and Altadena's here, and that's one of the big major fires. I know people that live in Pasadena and they've had to put out spot fires in their backyard I know people who have really close friends who have lost their entire house, burnt to the ground, nothing left. And nobody really saw that coming, at least not on this level. And it's still not done. They're facing 3 more days or 4 more days of Santa Ana winds. And I remember experiencing them where it would just blow, the winds blow out of the desert, and they are so dry. You have humidity levels that are like 2 or 3%. And so any little spark, it instantaneously turns into a fire. I remember one day that Griffith Park, that's the biggest park in Los Angeles. It's where the zoo is. We spent a fair amount of time in that area. I think it was 8,000 acres in size. Maybe 4,000. My brain's not working completely, but 4,000, 8,000 acres. It's a big park. It's not, just down the street here. And it was on fire, and I was 10 miles away as the crow would fly, and you would have thought that it was snowing outside by what was falling on my windshield. And you see these situations where people have lost everything except the little bit that they had in a suitcase or a backpack or the clothes on their back. And we're never promised that we don't encounter that same kind of situation. We probably don't have the fear of wildfires here like they do in Southern California, but there are lots of things that can go wrong in life. And yet, for the Christian, the reminder is that we still have hope. We have an inheritance. We have a portion set aside for us because God can't be taken away from us. God doesn't abandon us. He walks with us, and whether in life or in death, we can and will endure. I want to end our time together today in a different way. We don't do this very often, but there's a passage in 2 Corinthians. And before we read it, I want to describe something that the language of the words that are used here. It talks about fixing your eyes on something. And fixing your eyes on something is what a watchman would do. So if you climb up a tower and you're a watchman over a city, you're constantly looking for something specific. It's not this generic sense of I'm just kind of like looking around. You're looking for the bad guy who's trying to sneak into the town and cause all kinds of problems. It's the same language that's used of somebody who is watching an athletic contest in the Bible. They're watching diligently for the specific activity. Maybe they're watching a specific athlete perform a very specific activity. What I love about this passage in 2 Corinthians is that it mirrors what David shares in these Psalms. It doesn't compromise the fact that things are really difficult, but it also encourages us to be able to look beyond it, to hold what's happening around us and embrace it and realize that's reality. We can't change that. To not make a bunch of romantic niceties or, nice theological statements, but to be real and honest and raw. But at the same time, then, to help us have a perspective that goes beyond that. That our circumstances don't necessarily dictate the core of who we are, the hope that we still have. So I'm going to ask you to stand up as Mike comes up. Maybe Mike and Jess come up to lead us in the final psalm. And we're going to read this off the screen together. Okay? Well, if you could stand. And let's read this together as a reminder of what we have. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal.